Welcome to Around Kansas. We've got a fun wildlife segment for you today. I'm Deb Goodrich.
And I'm Michelle Martin.
And you might notice some unusual animals behind us today. And this is the John Brown Jayhawk. And a few years ago, the town of Lawrence, where the Jayhawks are, of course, where the Jayhawks run wild, actually, commissioned various artists to interpret the Jayhawk, and this is our favorite. John Brown from The Tragic Prelude, portrayed as a Jayhawk. I'm sorry, you just can't get any better than that.
And behind me, we have a Wyoming cowboy riding the range, rounding up cattle on his trusty jackalope. Yes, you heard it right, folks. He's riding a jackalope. So it's another one of our mythic creatures on Wildlife Wednesday.
Well, you take advantage of what you have, it just all depends. And so today we're talking about made up creatures, or maybe they're made up. Now, the Jayhawk likely comes from the Irish, and where else would it come from? And the Jayhawk was a bird that the Irish described as something between a jay and a hawk, and it would just worry its prey to death. So you might ask the Missouri Tigers about that, if that's accurate. And some of
On
the
basketball, it is.
that's right. And so it's of course, became synonymous with the Kansans, certain Kansans during the Civil War, and the folks who would loot and plunder over in Missouri, and bless their hearts. So that's when it became widespread here. I think the first mention of the Jayhawk was in the gold fields of California before that time. And that's when it started being written up and it was referred to. But unless, maybe you've seen a real Jayhawk. I have not, except on the basketball court. Not really haven't paid much attention on the football field, but on the basketball court, I dare say they will worry their prey to death and take advantage. So tell us about the story of the maybe not so mythical Jayhawk. I have to tell you, before I ever came to Kansas, they sold jackalopes, mounted jackalopes or jackalope mounts in a store back home that just sold everything. And I'd see these things, and they said that they came from out west. They were smart enough not to say these were growing around the hills of Virginia, North Carolina, but these were killed and captured out west, and mounted. And I'm like, oh my gosh! And it was a while before I realized that these taxidermy jackalopes were maybe two or three animals that the taxidermist got creative with.
Well, Deb, it's interesting because when you look up when you look up and read about jackalopes, there are actually it has antecedents in the ancient and medieval and Renaissance world in Europe. Actually, in Persia in the 12th and 13th century, there are stories about these rabbits, large rabbits with single horns that are similar to that of a unicorn in medieval and Renaissance Europe. In particular in Bavaria, there are numerous stories about large horned rabbits. And so I think, these ideas come to us from literature and from art. And so then they get reinterpreted in different time periods. And of course, with so many Europeans who eventually made their way to America as immigrants, then they begin to reinterpret things from the old country. And so that is one explanation as to how we got jackalopes.
Well, I think most of these come from beer and whiskey, and just about any age you want to talk about. And as a historian, I have often said you can divide history into two eras, before Prozac and after Prozac. And these obviously occurred before Prozac. They should just put Prozac in the water anymore. But Yeah, I think there was some alcohol involved in these creatures. I dare say.
Right.
I would bet on it.
And I would, I'm sure there was a fair amount of alcohol involved in Jayhawks and Jayhawking. And
Oh, no
I
doubt.
I think that's interesting how actually the Jayhawkers, those Kansans who would go across to Missouri during the territorial period in the Civil War, and as you said, loot and plunder, um, their actual mythical bird becomes a verb. It's they were jayhawking. And you see in the newspapers references to jayhawking in the papers. So it's not only a mythical creature, it's also a verb. So it gets double duty in our language.
Yeah, so far jackaloping hasn't become a verb, but hey, it could
Oh,
happen. It could happen. Hey,
but
stay with us. We'll be right back.
Welcome to the Western Kansas Wildlife Travel Center, right here in my hometown of Oakley, Kansas. We're the front door of Western Kansas, located on 3 main highways, I-70, US 83, and US 40. And all those roads lead to history, beautiful scenery, and adventure, no matter which direction you go. We now have an IHOP. That brand that you've trusted up and down the road in all your travels is staffed with local folks, real people just like you and me, and we're waiting on you to join us. So for fun, adventure, fuel up, fuel your body, and let's have some fun.
Howdy, I'm Seth Hayes, and welcome to my hometown, from then to now. Council Grove has a rich history as deep as the prairie tallgrass. Spend the day visiting 25 historic sites, or explore the unique shops and restaurants, or mosey out of town along the Santa Fe Trail. You all visit my hometown, Council Grove, in the heart of the Flint Hills.
hi, welcome back to Wildlife Wednesday on Around Kansas. I'm Michelle Martin.
And I'm Deb Goodrich.
Deb, what I found fascinating looking at jackalopes, believe it or not, there may actually have been a time in history, especially in the Central Plains and the Northern Plains, where rabbits were infected with something called the Shope papillomavirus. I know I'm getting all scientific on you, but this virus was said to have caused these bizarre growths on the heads and faces of the rabbits. Therefore, people may have been interpreting those as horns. And sometimes they actually were called horn rabbits. And so hence jackalopes. And actually in the 1930s, in about 1933, 1934, there were wildlife veterinarians and physicians who examined wild cottontail rabbits in Kansas and noted these protuberances, these bizarre growths on them, and classified them as the Shope papillomavirus and described them as rabbits with horned protuberances. So there is some possible truth to the idea of the jackalope, but it really picks up popularity in Wyoming when some gentlemen start hunting and applying their taxidermy skill and take the horns and the rabbit and put them together, and voila, the jackalope. And of course, how many times can you go into a Western town somewhere and go into a local bar and find a jackalope above the bar?
Oh
I mean,
yeah.
they're everywhere.
Yeah, they really are. But like I said, you can't make this stuff up, that they maybe a few of them really protuberances. Oh, for goodness sake. Is that not what's the word for nose? Is that uh it's something like that. Proboscis, what is that word? Something protuberance. So yeah, a big protuberance. Oh, gosh. Oh, who knew, people? That's why we're here for you, so you can learn all these things.
I know.
So it reminds me, and this is obviously not mythic, but it was a really cute take on it. One of our friends here in Western Kansas talked about the first time that I think it was his grandfather saw a pheasant. And of course, pheasant are not native to Kansas. They are actually from China. So you would expect to find such an exotic looking bird in China, but not in Western Kansas, especially several years ago. So the little boy saw a pheasant for the first time, and he ran home and told his mother that he'd just seen a baby dragon. And I'm like, is that the cutest description of a pheasant you ever heard? That he thought it was a baby dragon. But it makes sense. I mean, you can see why. He'd seen pictures of dragons in his storybooks, and that I can see where he would think that just dragon had just hatched out, and there it was.
Well, and little could he know, if he was around your neck of the woods in Kansas at one point in time in our history, he would have seen a dragon.
I know.
Lots of dragon.
Maybe not breathing fire, but a dragon nonetheless. So
Exactly.
that reminds me, we need to throw this in, talking about mythic creatures. And yeah, we might as well throw in dragons. Our friend Marla Matkin has written that really sweet book, A Dragon's Tale, that we hope to have published by the end of the year. So maybe in time for Christmas. And it's such a sweet story of a little boy who was growing up at Fort Wallace when Dr. Turner discovered the plesiosaur. And to him, that's a dragon. And he has read King Arthur's tales and slaying dragons. And so it just sparks his imagination. It's a wonderful story. Can't wait for that to come out.
I know. And folks, really, whether you're thinking about jackalopes and their protuberances or John Brown Jayhawks, it's all about the power of the Kansas imagination.
Isn't that the truth? So folks, we've loved spending this time with you today. This one's been a lot of fun, and we look forward to visiting with you next time. And in the meantime, I'm Deb Goodrich.
And I'm Michelle Martin.
And we will see you somewhere around Kansas. Probably not riding a jackalope. Bye-bye.
Okay, looks like it's time for our tour. Welcome to the Fort Wallace Museum. Here at the museum, you're going to find some really interesting stuff, like our replica stagecoach from the Butterfield Overland Dispatch. We've got facades from the fort buildings. We've got an 1870s flag. There's a plesiosaur that was discovered locally. We've got the Ray pump organ collection. We're a little bitty place with a great big story, and we'd love to have you.
In 1821, a trade route was opened from Missouri in the United States across prairies and mountains to Mexico. In 2021, we will mark 200 years of epic conflicts and grand adventures, larger-than-life personalities, and sweeping landscapes. Join us on an historic journey. The Santa Fe Trail lives on.
Find us on social media or santafetrail.org.